Russia-Ukraine war, list of key events. Russia said it would take all necessary measures to defend its citizens and key infrastructure from Ukrainian attacks. On Sunday, 2 alleged Ukrainian drones hit a major Baltic Sea terminal, starting a fire. Towns near the border, including Belgorod, have also come under fire, with at least 21 people killed in an attack at the end of last year. Kyiv said it shot down 8 Russian attack drones launched against southern and central regions of the country. Politics and diplomacy. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov clashed with the United States and Ukraine at a United Nations Security Council meeting where Moscow ruled out any peace plan backed by Kyiv and its Western allies, and China warned that further global chaos could impact the slowing global economy. Lavrov dismissed Kyiv's peace plan as a road to nowhere. On a visit to Kyiv, Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk promised to keep supporting Ukraine against Russia's invasion, which he described as a battle between good and evil. He also said he wanted to resolve differences over grain shipments and trucking that had recently soured ties between the neighbors. The website for Russian politician Boris Nadezhdin, who has criticized the invasion of Ukraine as a fatal mistake, said he had so far secured some 85,000 signatures backing him as a candidate in the March presidential election. Under Russian electoral law, Nadezhdin needs 100,000 signatures by the end of January to be allowed to run. Russia's parliament began considering a bill that would allow the state to seize the property of those convicted of defamation of the security forces, including by criticizing the war in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky thanked Ukrainians abroad for their support during Russia's invasion and proposed changing the constitution to allow for dual citizenship. Weapons. The International Institute for Strategic Studies, IISS, a leading think tank, said the war in Ukraine had undermined Russia's confidence in its conventional forces and increased the importance of non-strategic nuclear weapons, NSNWs, as a means of deterring and defeating NATO in any potential future conflict. NSNWs include all nuclear weapons with a range of up to 5,500 kilometers, 3,400 miles. Said the logic of using such weapons would be to escalate a conflict in a controlled fashion, either to prevent the US and NATO from engaging, or to coerce them into war termination on Russian terms. Russia-Ukraine war, list of key events. As the war enters its day, these are the main developments. Fighting. The Ukrainian Air Force said Russia launched drone and missile attacks across the country, hitting both civilian and critical infrastructure. The Air Force said Moscow attacked the central Poltava region with 2 Iskander missiles. It also launched 3 S-300 surface-to-air missiles over the Donetsk region in the east. Air defense systems destroyed 4 of 8 Russia-launched drones overnight, the Air Force said. 3 civilians were injured in the attacks. Ukraine said Russia must provide proof that an Ilyushin-76 military transport plane that crashed in the Belgorod region last week was carrying dozens of Ukrainian prisoners of war, as Moscow claims. Kirill Budanov, the chief of Ukraine's GOR military intelligence, said Kyiv had no verifiable information about who was on the plane. Ukraine's coordination staff for the treatment of prisoners of war said relatives of POWs on a list of names provided by Moscow were unable to identify their loved ones in crash site photos provided by Russian authorities. Politics and diplomacy. The Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, said it had charged 5 people for corruption in weapons procurement. The SBU accuses the 5 of conspiring with Ministry of Defense officials to embezzle almost $40 million earmarked to buy 100,000 mortar shells for the war. If found guilty, the group faces up to 12 years in prison. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky declared his income publicly for the first time, as part of his drive to promote transparency and root out corruption. Zelensky said that in 2021, the year before Russia began its full-scale invasion, he and his family had an income of 10.8 million hryvnias, $286,168. In 2022, the family's income dropped to 3.7 million hryvnias, $98,535, as the war cut the family's rental income from property. Russian officials in Ukrainian regions occupied by Moscow's forces said the Ukrainian language had been stripped of any official status, effectively banning it from public use. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, said Chief Rafael Grossi will visit Ukraine, including its capital and the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the week after next. Weapons. Zelensky warned that a drop in military aid from the United States to Ukraine would send a bad signal, as right-wing Republicans in the U.S. block additional support unless it is linked to changes in U.S. border policy. Passivity from the United States or the lack of support would be a bad signal, Zelensky told German national broadcaster ARD. NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg, who began a visit to the U.S. on Sunday, said continued U.S. military funding for Ukraine had a key deterrent message for China. U.S. President Joe Biden has asked Congress to approve $61 billion in new aid to Ukraine. Stoltenberg said it was a good deal, noting that while the aid was a fraction of the Pentagon's overall budget, it had enabled Ukrainian forces to destroy and degrade the Russian military. Stoltenberg is due to meet members of Congress on Tuesday. Russia-Ukraine war, list of key events. As the war enters its day, these are the main developments. Fighting. Russian President Vladimir Putin said the Ilyushin 76 plane that crashed near the border with Ukraine was shot down by Ukrainian air defenses, whether on purpose or by mistake. The death toll from Russian missile strikes on Ukraine's second-largest city Kharkiv earlier this week rose to 11, officials said. Putin said Russia's future ruling class should be made up of army veterans, and not weirdos who show their backsides. The remarks appeared to slam a raunchy, almost naked celebrity party held in Moscow last month that drew fierce public backlash. A court in Moscow on Friday extended the pretrial detention of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich by 2 months, following his arrest last year on espionage charges. Economy. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced the creation of a new economic body to assist businesses in wartime after several entrepreneurs voiced outrage at the arrest of a prominent banker. In his nightly video address, Zelensky said the All-Ukraine Economic Platform would help businesses overcome the challenges posed by Russia's invasion. Diplomacy. U.S. President Joe Biden criticized congressional Republicans for stalling military aid to Ukraine amid a lack of consensus on a separate deal to reinforce the U.S.-Mexico border. The chair of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee said Turkey needed to cooperate better on holding Russia accountable for its invasion of Ukraine following the U.S. government's approval of a $23 billion deal to sell F-16 warplanes to Ankara. The chief negotiator for Moldova's Russian-backed separatist Transnistria region announced that his team would no longer attend talks on the country's future in areas under government control because he feared arrest. Russia-Ukraine war, list of key events. As the war enters its day, these are the main developments. Fighting. Ukraine's Air Force said Russia launched 14 attack drones and 5 missiles on the southern Black Sea regions with air defense systems destroying 11 of the drones. The Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine said 6 people were injured in the historic city of Odessa and residential buildings and a warehouse were damaged. Ukrainian security sources said they orchestrated a drone attack on an oil refinery in the southern Russian town of Tuapse, about 240 kilometers, 150 miles, southeast of the Russian-annexed Crimean Peninsula. The attack caused a major fire, but there were no reports of casualties. Nepal's Foreign Minister Narayan Prakash Saud told the Associated Press news agency that Nepal had asked Russia to send back hundreds of Nepali nationals who had been recruited to fight against Ukraine and repatriate the bodies of those who had died in the conflict. The Russian army is estimated to have recruited more than 200 Nepali nationals to fight in Ukraine and at least 14 have died there, Saud said. Ukraine's National Resistance Center said it had seen mercenaries from Malaysia, accompanied by a translator at Russian military training camps in the Russian-occupied Donetsk region. It warned that anyone fighting alongside the Russians against Ukraine was a military target. Malaysia did not respond to requests for more information on the alleged presence of Malaysian nationals. Several major Ukrainian state organizations, including the state-run energy firm Naftogaz, the Post Office and Transport Safety Agency, reported major cyber attacks that a source close to the government blamed on Russian intelligence. Politics and diplomacy. A court in St. Petersburg jailed anti-war activist Daria Trepova for 27 years after finding her guilty of terrorism and the killing of a prominent ultra